There is a YouTube channel that I am not familiar with. It goes by the name We Need to Talk with 88,000 subscribers. Take a look at his channel. Seems like he just does a bunch of conversations in regards to relationship podcasts. So it's definitely something I'm going to keep an eye out in the future. Nevertheless, this brother had a conversation with this lovely young woman by this name. I'm not even going to try to butcher her name, so I'm not going to say it, but it's right there. Title of this video is Why Women Are Saying No to Traditional Roles. Now, the real reason that this came across my timeline is that this woman says that marriage is the lowest paid form of S work. Very interesting. So let's get active. Now, I will say I've listened to a couple of her thoughts. She's your standard issue feminist, activist, women's empowerment, no empathy for men, the patriarchy still, one of those. Nevertheless, let's give her a fair shot and let's listen to her thoughts. Without further ado.
And then I said that marriage is the lowest paid form of sex work. And people were really annoyed about it because
the lowest.
Yes.
The lowest
paid form of sex work. I believe marriage is the lowest paid form of sex
Explain
work
yourself.
Within the dynamic of cis-hetero marriage between man and woman.
How so?
The reason why I say that is because when we look at the origins of marriage and we observe this ongoing, growing trend of the trad wife becoming this thing that we're seeing everywhere, it's this idea that the woman is there.
It's crazy that she's describing something traditional as a new trend. That should give you an idea of her mindset. Let's go.
To serve and to be the homekeeper, and the idealized arrangement is that the man makes the money, he financially takes care of the home, and you get love and acceptance and the title of wife in return. And now when we look at marriages,
sounds like a good deal,
more commonly within our local sphere, outside of the sensationalized trad wife content, what we're seeing a lot is many unhappily married people, specifically women. I receive a lot of messages from women who tell me that in their marriage, they essentially have to, it's not that they have to, but they feel like they have to perform sexual favors for their husband in order for things to be done. Whether that's, for example, I don't know if you might have seen this flying around on the internet, there was an interview between Katy Perry and Alex Cooper on Alex Cooper's podcast called Call Her Daddy. And Katy Perry was saying that within her marriage to Orlando Bloom, if he closes the cupboards and, cleans the dishes, and he's going to get his dick sucked as essentially a reward for closing the cupboard, washing the plates, just being a tidy human being. So we see a bartering system in place here where outside of Katy Perry, because Katy Perry's statement is representative of what a lot of women are doing in their marriages, where you do that thing he likes and then you get a particular need met. Now, a lot of people found issue with what I said because there's this idea that the sex worker versus the married woman are in completely different worlds where, hierarchically speaking, the married woman is at the top of the hierarchy because she's married, she's been chosen, she's done the thing, she's got the ring. But the sex worker is positioned towards the bottom of the power structure because of how society views women who engage with men for financial benefit and the shaming surrounding that. And so the whole pushback towards me referring to marriage as sex work
is so crazy.
Was rooted in this place from married women saying, how dare you liken me to a sex worker? I am not a sex worker. When in reality, as long as you're choosing to partner with men, there is an element of using your sexuality to get what you want. And within sex work exists on a spectrum. So there are more...
Hold on.
Physical.
Before she moves on, this right here has to be some of the most damaging content that can hit women's eyes if they choose to be influenced by a moron like this. First off, as she's breaking down her thoughts of why marriage is the lowest form of sex work, did you notice that she took it from the position of women being unhappy in marriage and then that she's anecdotally heard from other women that they have to grant sex in order things to get done. This is without any studies. This is not without any data. How many marriages are being broken up due to sex life? So again, on the back of women's empowerment, she establishes that men in marriages use women just for sex. And oh, by the way, I saw this thing from Katy Perry, which is also an anecdotal example that adds on to my very anecdotal example. What she's essentially doing is she's creating a coping mechanism on behalf of the trauma that she's suffered within her life, and also why no man has chosen to marry her. So what people like this do is that they find any bit of information to latch onto so that it becomes a part of their coping mechanism to help them understand why they are unmarriageable in the first place. Degrading the traditional concept of marriage on the idea that love or sex within a relationship is not a two-party street, but it more so places a woman in a victim mindset of man using you for sex to get things done is so dangerous. And it's more so dangerous to couples, women that are already married, because they'll be influenced by banshees like this one, leading to a higher divorce rate on account of the woman initiating because she's now victimized herself based off of something that doesn't exist. Meanwhile, there's real studies that can be done in regards to sexlessness within marriages, which would paint a clearer picture on some of the negative components of becoming married and what that does to a sex life. This one wants to elevate sex work, put it on a pedestal because she's about that life, and then degrade marriage because no one wants her. She wants to increase the value or put on a pedestal what sex work is, while also chastising marriage because she's unworthy.
Cool forms of sex work, which you would probably call full service sex work, which involves sleeping with someone and doing more physical acts. Okay. And then when we look towards the complete opposite side of the spectrum of sex work, there are things like, for example, phone sex operators, there are dominatrixes, there are people who sell foot pictures. Whilst what they're doing might not immediately come across to us as sex work based on a definition we've all been taught.
Yes, they do.
It's all this idea of selling your sensuality and exchanging your erotic interactions for you to get something that you want. There are married women who are reluctantly having sex with their husbands, who are reluctantly engaging in sexual favors because they know that that's what's going to make sure that the bills are going to get paid this month. Right. The kids' school uniform's going to be paid for. They're essentially taking one for the team being them and their kids.
Right. Let's just say that what she's saying is true. Let's say that there's some percentage of women out there that have to utilize their body in order to get stuff done. I would not say that marriage then is the lowest paid form of sex work. I would say that couple is in turmoil and that they need help. It's a very specific thing. But again, she's using her biases that men are evil in order to paint a picture regarding something that has been valuable for generations before us. And again, it's a coping mechanism. It allows her to sleep a little bit more soundly at night.
And then there are married women who recognize the power that they hold within the institution and infrastructure of marriage. And this is how I would behave if I was a married woman, where I want to go on vacation to XYZ. Okay. So I'm not going to have sex with him for a while. And when I know that I want to ask him or pose the idea of this thing that I really want us to do, I know that if I bring a tit out, he's likely to say yes. Or if I engage sexually with him, if I have sex with him, if I do the thing he likes, we're getting closer to the thing that I want to do. So I'm using my sexuality to my benefit because I can and because it's a power and because I know that it's going to reap the result I want. Also,
that's a whore mindset.
That question, sex is a huge cornerstone theme when we talk about marriage, so much so that within religion, especially Christianity, virginity is such a huge concept. There is an emphasis that's placed on sex, especially on the woman's body. Even culturally speaking, where I'm from in Nigeria, we have something called a bride price.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, it's icky to talk about on the surface because bride price, that's interesting. Like you're essentially, for lack of better wording, you're offering the bride's family a bunch of assets and gifts in exchange for their daughter, but it's not entirely in exchange for their daughter. It's also a gesture of me saying, I present you these gifts as a way to express that I intend to take your daughter seriously. I intend to treat her well.
Yeah.
Please receive these gifts as a gesture of my intention of seriousness.
It's investment.
And also partially as a way to kind of compensate for the resources of human labor they're about to lose by losing their daughter.
The Western example of this is that expensive-ass ring.
It's a thankless job most of the time. For a lot of women, they're enslaved and they're unhappy.
Wow.
And that sounds
Marriage
really
is
extreme
enslavement.
to
Got it.
say.
That's pretty bold.
It's bold to say, but we have to recognize that we're having this conversation
victims.
and we're discussing marriage largely through the lens and lived experience of being Westerners. You know, there are parts of the world, including Nigeria, where Nigeria is amongst the countries with the highest domestic violence rates. Intimate partner violence is even worse in Nigeria. It's super normalized for men to beat their wives. And, you know, sometimes men will complain to the pastor or to complain to the wife's family, like, she's not having enough sex with me.
Right.
She's not sexual enough. I'm not attracted to her. A lot of this emphasis is placed on the woman sexually servicing the man. So again, when we bring this back to my comment I made about marriage and sex work being tied, if we could all relax and shed our stigma towards sex work, we can focus on what the machinations of marriage actually look like, how women are treated in marriage, and why, if we're going to refer to marriage as sex work, what we can do to make it safer for women. Because whether we agree or disagree on marriage and sex work being linked, there is still an expectation of labor that's placed on women, and women still, for the most part, have to use sex as a way to navigate their marriages.
This is actually the most ridiculous piece of content I think that I've reviewed all year. There's an expectation on the man that he has duties that he has to fulfill as well. Do you not understand that? Do you not have enough empathy for the other side of the coin to understand the man's perspective as well? By the way, I find it so interesting that women like this will get on these platforms and complain about how women are sexualized within culture, within media, but then is legitimately having a serious conversation with a man with her entire shirt undone. Women like this will complain about being sexualized, but will absolutely, at a moment's notice, utilize their sexuality to get ahead. Listening to content like this, I see why so many women are okay with engaging in the various forms of S work throughout their life, because they have influencers, authors that will create content that says that it's okay. It's so damaging to hear content like this, because what women like this do not understand and won't give credence to is that, at least in the West, marriage mostly benefits women. Why is it that I say that? Most men today are more naturally polygamous than women. Marriage in the West is 2-1, which goes against that very nature. And at the same time, if divorce happens due to existing beliefs regarding men and the family court system, and the government wanted to make as much money off of the split, the man, who is generally the breadwinner, will suffer more. Saying things like marriage is more like enslavement contributes to men losing their shirt because their wife has found this feminist podcast which paints her as a victim. Have these chicks thinking every time that they have sex with a man that they're engaging in prostitution is wild.
Refer to marriage as sex work, what we can do to make it safer for women, because whether we agree or disagree on marriage and sex work being linked, there is still an expectation of labor that's placed on women, and women still, for the most part, have to use sex as a way to navigate their marriages.
Yep. So you know, what's so interesting is,
Please refute.
I think I can talk to you for days on each one of these topics.
Okay.
And this one in particular is near and dear to my heart, because I'm married, I've studied marriage for quite some time. And a lot of what you're saying will be abrasive to many people. But you know what? I agree with a large percentage of it.
What?
Some of it I don't. But the large percentage of it, I do. I think that marriage is an institution that must be transformed. And to your point of, well, I mean, you called it women enslaved. I mean, pretty much that's what you said marriage is. I would argue that for a large percentage, according to research I've done, a large percentage of marriage has low satisfaction. And there's lots of nefarious things happening in those marriages. But then there's also a percentage of marriage, 20%, right? This is according to research by Eli Finkel out of the States. But 20% of marriages actually have a higher satisfaction rate than the history of all marriages since marriage has been tracked. And I think that what we need to do is we need to look more, cognitively, intelligently around what's happening in that 20% of marriages, and also vis-a-vis what's happening in these 80% of marriages. And we need to do away with this. One of the things that I advocate for, and I get pushback on, is I think that marriage should be much, much harder to enter and much, much easier to exit. Right? So what I mean by that is, in order to be married shouldn't just simply be, in many places in the world, you could literally pay a small fee, sign your name, done. You could be coerced, etc. Right? You go to Vegas, do it in a drive-through. You know what I mean? Whereas if you want to exit that marriage, in most areas around the world, it's 6 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's costly.
It's costly. There's all types of violence happening within, you're coerced to stay in, etc. So I think what we need to do is we need to make it much harder to enter. It needs to be rigorous to enter. Because I think going to economics is that if it's harder, then we place more value and more rigor in determining whether or not this is something that we want to do.
That's actually a very elegant way to say, hey, listen, demon, witch, serpent, woman, let me reorient your Delilah way of thinking, as it's going to lead to more destruction amongst families that are currently families, into an approach that actually makes sense. Now, what he's saying, that it should be harder to enter, is exactly what we do on this platform. Right. There's been no standardization for a woman, what she should look like, act like, what she should strive to be, how she should treat a man throughout modern times today. And a lot of these guys are just walking into a situation, I guess I love her. Let's just get married. And they get their shirts ripped out from under them in 5 to 10 years. I think that it is the man who is in control of relationships, in control of getting on bended knee, that should be placing it higher requirements of what he expects out of a woman before he makes the decision to marry her. There don't need to be no law changes. There don't need to be more government within our lives. It needs to be self-directed by the men that are making this decision. But it's so sneaky what she tried to throw in there, as if these men who are, working in order to protect and provide, right? Like if they request sex from their wife, they are the slave drivers, right? Like they are, you are enslaved. Therefore, if he asks and I don't want to, right? Like, why? That's just a problem in the relationship. They probably need therapy because their needs are not being met. But you likening marriage to sex work because of your understanding of women being slaves within a marriage or relationship, it demonstrates a lot, more so about yourself. Anyway, there's another snippet in here which is going to shed light onto her mindset in regards to her family upbringing. Let's watch that.
In the Imperial Empire, here.
Yes.
But you have had therapy. So now I'm even more curious. What about the relationship with your father?
So interestingly, around the time when I cut my mum off, I'd also cut my dad off because for me, it was like my anger towards my dad was that he didn't protect me. Like it was a thing where he just kind of let her just do what she wanted to do because she was so insistent, and it was safer for him to just let her do what she's doing. Family members who are related to me through my dad, like his sisters, would like get involved and be like, Dad really wants to speak to you. We really understand why you're upset. Can we arrange a conversation? Can we help mediate? And I was like, no, I'm not ready. I don't want to talk to him. And then it got to a stage where I said, look, if he wants to ever speak to me again, he's going to have to write me a letter detailing exactly what he's sorry for and how he believes that I've been impacted.
That's the boundary.
Right.
That you said. And he just...
So he wrote the letter.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, he wrote the letter, and within the first few sentences, I was like, okay, he's sorry. I can tell that this is because my dad is not a very outwardly expressive, emotional person. During my upbringing, never really told me that he loved me, and that was something that really bothered me. And so, in the letter, he acknowledged that. In the letter, he acknowledged that he just really wants to have a chance to have a relationship with his daughter again. Now that him and my mom aren't together, he's his own new person.
So now it should make a lot more sense. She had terrible relationships with the two most important people in her young life, has never seen a happy marriage, longed for a great relationship with her father, and due to her abandonment issues, now likens marriage to prostitution, or sex work rather is more accurate of what she said. Let's listen to a couple of quick seconds.
He's his own new person. And now the relationship I have with him is incredibly supportive.
Too late.
He said,
damage been done, Pops.
I love you first.
I think that is beautiful what happened, even to the point where you asserted yourself, right? Knowing your worth, knowing the requirement in order to be in your life. You set those boundaries and he obliged. I think that's beautiful. But that happened later in your life, right?
Much later.
Yeah.
So then
it's too late.
2 years ago that we had that conversation.
All right, so if that only happened 2 years ago, then what were your early romantic relationships like? Because you hadn't had the therapy, you were still in that environment. What were those relationships like?
So my earlier relationships were bog standard, using boys as a site to seek validation. And so I would fall into that classic pattern of being the anxious person who would go for like the classic avoidant boy. And then when he starts pulling away, it would be this internal panic and
to get him back.
Like I have to pull him in closer and be quite passive and clingy and all the traits that can push anybody away.
Now that I've seen all this and knowing that I was correct in my guesstimation of where all of this comes from, I can't help but feel just bad for her, right? But because of the issues within her family life, it has now trickled down into her being a fighter of women's empowerment, empowering them into situations that's going to lead them more alone and unhappy within their lives. The only difference is, and the reason that we have to talk about it, is that she's incentivized to do it because she gets paid for it. That's the conclusion of my comments here today. Guys, write me some comments down below so we can have a conversation about this. Last but not least, if you guys want to join my men's self-development community, ladies, listen, y'all been hitting me up. Y'all can't join. This is a men's only group. What up? Like, we got to talk about man shit up there, right? My guys, they need some education in regards to leveling up, especially when it comes from a wealth building perspective, which is now our focus up there. Click the link down in the description box down below, beam up, see what's in store, and I will see you guys soon. Until next time, YouTube, peace.